So 2 new cases in Queensland overnight. The first is a woman in her 20s who arrived into Cairns on a super yacht. So all of the people who arrived into Cairns on that super yacht went into hotel quarantine except for 6 crew who remained on the yacht to maintain it, to keep it safe. We're now testing those 6 crew and ensuring that none of them have COVID-19. So the super yacht originated in the Maldives and then came to Cairns. So we're trying to work through with them how it got onto that yacht. But it is a lesson to us all that super yachts that have come from elsewhere in the world, no matter how long they might have been at sea, are a risk and are required to quarantine all of the people on that yacht, either in hotel quarantine or for those few remaining crew that must stay on the yacht as per Maritime Safety Queensland's requirements. They can stay on the yacht, but we still manage them to ensure that the virus doesn't get through that route into Queensland. Then our second case is a gentleman in his 40s who went to the northern beaches on the 12th of December, then stayed in Sydney after that, arriving back into Queensland on the 18th of December. He went into home quarantine after initially testing negative when he first came back, went into home quarantine and has been there since. And I commend him for what he has done. He has followed every single requirement to the letter. He became unwell, so he went and got tested again and came back late last night as a positive case. So he is now being transferred to the PA hospital and we'll manage that. We don't believe, but we're talking to him again, of course, we don't believe he's been in contact with anyone in the community other than close household contacts who are now in quarantine for 14 days. So he's done everything that was asked of him. We're just confirming that now to make sure that there isn't anyone else out there who also needs to go into quarantine. Now, he was not one of the 53 people that New South Wales Health has let us know about who are close contacts of known cases. He was someone else. So that's why it is so important. Don't wait for a text message from New South Wales Health that you're a close contact of someone from the Northern Beaches or from elsewhere in Sydney. If you have been in the Northern Beaches, you have been asked to go into home quarantine up until just recently when everyone goes into hotel quarantine. You must absolutely stay in home quarantine and shouldn't have contact with anyone else and absolutely shouldn't have visitors to your house. That is very important because I am concerned that we do have the virus now in Queensland. We have seen those positive sewage results and we know that there are a lot of people who have come back into Queensland from that northern beach area and from other parts of Sydney. So it is really important that everyone goes back to maintaining that social distancing, and anyone with any symptoms, please immediately come forward and get tested. We will have clinics open all through Christmas and New Year. They might be slightly different, so please go on the website and just check which is your local clinic and the hours it's operational. But if you have any symptoms, please come forward, as those over 20,000 Queenslanders have in the last 2 days. Come forward and get tested. That's what we can do to protect everyone. Now, if I could just briefly mention, there's been some confusion about the new requirement that hospitality venues must have electronic recording. That is on the venue. The venue must have a way to electronically record everyone who comes into that venue and to store that information for a minimum of 30 days, a maximum of 56 days. That's critical. But we at this stage have not required the use of specific QR codes. I know that has happened in New South Wales. We have not done that in Queensland. So if you don't have a smartphone, you can still go to your favourite venue. It's just that that venue will have to capture your details in an electronic format in their database, so they have that information. It will be kept private, and its only use is to give it to a contact tracing officer if it's needed. Thank you. happy to take questions.
Also, what was the advice for Christmas Day in terms of hugging? The Minister mentioned social distancing. Are you allowed to hug mum and dad or grandpa and grandma?
I would restrict that to your close known contacts. So your close relatives are people who live in your household. I would not be doing that in broader groups outside. I just think that's a risk that's not necessary. Now, if you're having Christmas Day with your close family, then you're having a lot of time with them, so you would be deemed a close contact. So yes, you can, if that's your normal tradition, hug your close family members. But I just say to people, think carefully. So maybe it's not the time to hug, your great-grandmother. It's the time to think how best you can keep your older relatives, your most vulnerable relatives, safe.
With the super yacht case, do you know how recently it was overseas and how long it had been in Australian waters or any of that kind of information?
I do have it, but I don't know it off the top of my head. So it's fairly recent that it came into Cairns because all of the people are still in that 14-day quarantine period.
Are we still on track for January 8 border reopening?
We'll just have to check, because you might remember that New South Wales has had that unlinked case, someone who lives in Western Sydney, who's a driver for the New South Wales Health Department, who moves people, international travellers, from the airport to their health hotel. So that person became positive. Initially it was thought from one of the cases that he'd actually driven from the airport to the health hotel, but now genomic sequencing has shown that he's actually got the Avalon cluster genome, but they don't know how he's acquired that. So he's an unlinked case at this stage. So that was announced on the 22nd of December. If that remains unlinked, then it would be 28 days from that date before we could open.
On cricket,
Yes.
you're going to be granting an exemption. What are, I guess, the processes there with that?
Right, so I know that those cricket matches that have been played in other states, those cricket players have been part of a bubble, and we've had that experience before. If you will remember, that's the process we used for the NRL and the AFL and for other sporting codes. So these cricketers have been part of a bubble. They will go into Sydney and continue to be part of a bubble. Then, if the decision is for the match to go ahead in the current arrangements, and that has not yet been decided, it's being worked through, they would remain in a bubble and they would come into quarantine in Queensland and continue to be part of a bubble. But I stress that those discussions are happening now and things could very well change. Nothing's been determined at this stage.
Given an exemption, it sounds like AFL and NRL players.
If all of those things are in place at the moment, if they've been in a bubble in New South Wales and not come into contact with the general community in Sydney, and if they remain in that bubble coming into Brisbane, then I think it could be done, but there's a lot of work to be done before that decision is made.
What's been done with the testing? There was a lot of complaints 2 days ago that queues were 8 hours. There's one person taking swabs on one place on the Gold Coast. Yesterday there were claims that people put off because of those queues when they saw that. Do you think that was the case, and what have you done to sort of increase resources?
So they immediately put in place more resources that rapidly led to an improvement in those waiting times. So those waiting times are much, much lower now, and I would encourage anyone with any symptoms, or if they've been in New South Wales, in Greater Sydney, to come forward and get tested today.
What is the rough waiting time? Do you have a time there?
It varies. You can go online, you can find out, but it varies throughout the state. I would suggest if you go to one place and there are very large queues, go online and see where there are other sites.